quit messing around. We have your waiver wire picks up for week 6 right now. Brad, let's get into it.
We're talking quarterbacks, and these are guys that we told you about last week. So why haven't you picked them up? We've got Geno Smith from the Seattle Seahawks. Currently, he's got 32% roster ownership in ESPN. We got 35 in Yahoo, 39 in Sleeper. Rick, why has Geno Smith still been doing so good?
It's just he's been efficient. Obviously, you can see he only threw 25 passes today, so he didn't have the huge volume like he had last week, but big touchdowns, long touchdowns. Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, who we know from history, have the ability to do that, and that's really helping out Geno Smith. He's not turning the ball over. He just has been a good professional quarterback. He doesn't have the skill set that a lot of the top end guys have, but being efficient, big plays, that's helping him out right now.
Another quarterback that you need to own is Zach Wilson from the Jets. Didn't produce any passing touchdowns, but got you a rushing touchdown this week. Told you about him last week, Rick. Why do people need to go pick him up still?
Look, it's early in the season for him, right? He's 3 weeks behind everybody because he missed those first 3 weeks. Today, he only threw 21 passes, but he gets you 210 yards. He has that rushing ability as well as the passing ability. So they were kicking ass today, so he didn't need to throw the ball a ton. And that's not going to be typical, right? They're not going to blow teams out 40-14 or whatever it was, but Miami was down a lot of guys. Teddy Bridgewater went down early, and they're demoralized right now after what happened to Tua. And then you see that happen to Bridgewater after one pass attempt in this game. So he didn't have to throw a bunch, still scored 14 fantasy points. Has looked pretty good his first 2 games back, and he's got a lot of talent around him. Look at the 2 running backs today, and then look at those 3 wide receivers he's got. This is a guy that could be a league winner down the stretch when they're trailing and need to air the ball out a little bit more.
Absolutely right. Now we're moving on to some tight ends. So Evan Engram from the Jacksonville Jaguars, he's starting to get targeted more. He's getting a heavy snap share, looks healthy, has been doing a pretty good job. Why should people want to pick up a guy like this now?
Look, he's going to be a big part of this offense, and I've been talking about him. I don't know about you, but Evan Ingram's a talented tight end. He had 104 targets just 2 years ago. He did struggle last year, and then he comes over and he's working with a new quarterback in a new offense, and it's taken some time for a lot of these guys to get into the loop, right? Marvin Jones wasn't really balling out the first few weeks. We're going to talk about him a little bit later, so stay tuned. And then Evan Engram getting more and more involved as the season goes along. I expect a lot of games where he's got 6 to 8 targets and get you 5 to 6 catches for 50, 60 yards. And right now at tight end, you'll take that. Tight end position is so bad this year. Evan Engram is a guy that maybe doesn't have the ceiling of some other guys, but I think is going to be a steady producer as this season goes on.
And the tight end position has been so weird that we're going to bring in Taysom Hill from the Saints. So 2 of the weeks he's had this year have been just monster games. And at the tight end position, he's kind of a dart throw that we almost have to consider taking. So why should people be picking him up when obviously people haven't?
Listen, I think this changes depending on who is in or out for the Saints, right? We're missing Michael Thomas. We're missing Jarvis Landry. They've got Dalton at quarterback, so Winston's not playing either. He's got the ability, right? He's an athlete. We know that he can score in multiple ways because he's been a quarterback. He's been a tight end. He's a running back at times, and they'll split him out wide at wide receiver. So today he gets 2 rushing touchdowns, throws a touchdown, and has a huge week, and he's got a big playability. I think they're going to have to continue to use him for that offense to be successful. It's not fun putting him in the lineup because it is a 0 or the potential for a 40-point week like we saw this week. There's no in between, it seems like, with him. But I do think that it's less likely that he has these big weeks as we get Michael Thomas back. Chris Olave doesn't leave in the game, and if he comes back from concussion protocol, and Jarvis Landry, if all 3 of those guys are out there, that makes it real hard for Hill, especially with Kamara also available, to be productive on a week-to-week basis.
Speaking of not fun, the Denver Broncos have been a team that's not very fun to watch right now. It's hard to watch Thursday night, them just fall apart. But a bright spot in this team has been Mike Boone. With Javonte Williams going down, Melvin Gordon has not looked himself. Mike Boone made some guys miss, did some things, wasn't huge in Thursday night, and this team is still struggling, but what is your take on this Denver running back situation and Mike Boone specifically?
I just think that the big reason why we're putting Mike Boone on here isn't necessarily the production that he's had fantasy wise or the success of the Broncos, but Melvin Gordon is the only other healthy back in that backfield. Melvin Gordon, I don't think can take the full workload like he did early in his career. He's also battled injuries just this year. So I don't see him getting the huge workload that people would expect him to get on name recognition after Javonte Williams went down. So that means Mike Boone could end up getting a lot of work. And if something would happen to Melvin Gordon, Boone could be a 20-touch guy on a week-to-week basis if Gordon's out. It's more of a speculative ad. Big words are tough. But if Gordon does go down and you have a spot on your roster, don't give up a good player for this guy. But if you have a spot on your roster, if you're rostering two defenses and don't need both, that's where you take a shot on Mike Boone, right?
I would agree. Definitely a depth guy at this point until we see more. A guy that isn't a depth guy, Alec Pierce from the Colts. So this guy has really been getting a better rapport with Matt Ryan, and you can see it. He's been getting consistent targets the last few weeks, and big one this week. He had 8 catches on 9 targets. Alec Pierce, what's your take on him, and how do you feel about adding him as a wide receiver 3?
Listen, everything after Michael Pittman is a toss-up for Indianapolis, and Alec Pierce has been gaining a lot of steam over the past 2 weeks as the number 2 option in that Indy passing game. And as long as Jonathan Taylor is out, which hopefully that's not too long, and nobody else is stepping up, that means Alec Pierce is going to get probably 8 targets a week. He's probably going to average 8 targets. Michael Pittman's probably going to be 10, and Alec Pierce is going to have an opportunity to produce and be a good flex option through bye weeks.
And they're coming up, so we need them. Next up, Rondale Moore. He's been up and down with injury this year, but he came back and had a strong showing and has low ownership. But this week he caught 7 for 68. What do you think about Rondale Moore moving forward? I know that Hop is coming back soon. Where are you at with him?
They're still going to need that number 3 receiver in this offense. And we talked about Greg Dortch was good at the beginning of the season. And at that point, we hadn't seen Rondale Moore. So we weren't sure if Rondale Moore was going to come in and be that next guy up. And he has been in his first 2 weeks back from injury. We like this offense to get better. When Hopkins gets back, it's going to be better. And I think that Rondale Moore could end up still having a pretty solid role as the number 3 receiver in this offense after Hop is back. So you get to use him for week 6, no matter what, right? Because Hopkins is out for 6 weeks. So you get him for next week, no matter what. And then you can just see how that plays out when Hopkins gets back.
For sure. All right, so Darius Slayton, this is a guy that we've talked about in fantasy. He's been a thing for a little while, but then disappeared. He bounced back. 6 catches on 7 targets, but has no ownership. So what are you doing with what could arguably be the only healthy receiver in New York?
Listen, you can't rely on Kadarius Toney playing, Kenny Galladay playing, Wan'Dale Robinson to this point in his career isn't playing, Sterling Shepard's out. Who's the next guy up? This is the guy that has the most chemistry with Daniel Jones, who is playing pretty solid ball right now. And Brian Dable is doing a really good job with this team. So Slayton is likely to be, I would go as far as saying that he's probably likely to be the highest targeted wide receiver for the remainder of the season, unless Kadarius Toney ends up actually playing the rest of the games throughout the season, or Wan'Dale Robinson plays the rest of the games throughout the season. But so we want that. And I want that in a Brian Dable offense that I think is going to continue to get better and more efficient as this season goes on.
All right, next up is a guy you should have already had on your roster because he's done very well this year. Devin Duvernay from the Baltimore Ravens. This guy's been a really strong receiver play. Where are you at with him, and is he going to keep this kind of production up the rest of the season?
Yeah, Devin Duvernay has produced so far this year. Right now, he is a startable wide receiver in leagues that start 3 wide receivers, right? Or he's a flex play. He's the wide receiver 35 on the season. Just through the half today, you can see on the screen 4 targets, 4 receptions, 44 yards, plus some rushing attempts. They get him involved in multiple ways. And guess what? He can even score you a touchdown, return, and a kick, which is unlikely. But if you get scoring for that's just a bonus. That's just a cherry on top since he's being involved in this offense. And yes, Rashad Bateman's out this week, but like I said, he was wide receiver 35 going into week 5. And it looks like from his production in the first half, he's probably going to maintain or be right outside of the top 36. So he's a wide receiver 3 right now that you can plug in the lineups in the flex and feel pretty good about.
Absolutely. All right, next up, Marvin Jones, another Jaguars player on this list this week. What say you about this guy? He's been up and down over the years, been fantasy relevant, been not fantasy relevant. Looks like maybe a guy that Trevor Lawrence is beginning to trust more and more. How do you feel about him moving forward?
I don't know if it was just like the early weeks trying to force the ball to Christian Kirk and Zay Jones and get the new guys acclimated, just new offense or what. Marvin Jones looked like he might be cooked. Then the last 2 weeks happened and he still got it. So I just think this offense, they're going to have to throw a lot. Obviously, they played Houston today, who didn't put up a ton of points, but any other week against almost any other team, they would have had to throw the ball a lot more. And we have seen a little bit of those second year struggles from Lawrence over the past couple of weeks as well. Mm-hmm. So, how that all plays out, it could get dicey with all these receiving options: Christian Kirk, Marvin Jones, Zay Jones, Evan Engram that we talked about earlier. It could get a little bit messy, or they could really start to gel and this offense could really start to cook as this season goes on. And Marvin Jones should be the most reliable wide receiver out of the bunch.
All right, next up is a running back we told you to pick up already as well, Tyler Allgeier from the Falcons. Did not have a strong showing this week, but is continuing to lead this backfield when it comes to attempts and getting heavily involved. What are you doing with him?
I mean, I think this is a guy most weeks you're going to start until Patterson and Damian Williams get back. And the stats don't look good this week, but they looked really good last week. But he faced Tampa Bay this week, and we know running backs versus Tampa Bay, they do struggle, and this is a rookie in his first start. So it's a tough start for the kid, but I like him. I think that he's going to be way more efficient in at least neutral matchups and not ones where you're going up against a real tough run defense. I like Tyler Allgeier a lot.
Next up, Michael Gallup. We told you to pick him up last week. Some of you did, so kudos to you guys. Continues to look better, made an amazing catch that most people don't know how he kept his feet in bounds. How are you feeling about Gallup now 2 weeks into return from injury?
And they didn't throw the ball a lot today. I think 16 pass attempts, and he had 5 of the targets. So the target market share is there. Rams are struggling on offense right now, and they're not. Yep. Dallas is going to face more pass attempts in the future, and they're going to have to throw more pass attempts. So he's going to get a ton of targets. He's probably going to have weeks where he's got 10, 12 targets and puts up some big numbers. So I love Michael Gallup, and I'm throwing him in my lineup just about every week.
Another guy that's arguably there with him is George Pickens, quickly becoming the leader in this target share in this room. This is a guy that we've been telling you to pick up for at least a week or so now. Led the team this week. I know it was a rough game against a strong Buffalo team, but what are you doing with Pickens? Are you on the same page with me that this guy's almost a must start at this point?
I wasn't starting him today against Buffalo. Obviously, just on target share, he could get a decent day, but it's not likely that he was going to have a huge week this week. But he looked good with his rookie counterpart who seems to love him. Pickett, most weeks, is going to be a definite starter, I think.
Another guy that we've been telling you about, Jakobi Meyers. The Patriots obviously destroyed Detroit this week, but Jakobi Meyers finally got his first touchdown of the season. Continues to get lots of targets, lots of catches, good amount of yards, especially this week. How do you feel about Jakobi Meyers? And moving forward, is he still a guy that you think is going to see this kind of heavy workload?
Yeah, I have no idea why we're even talking about Jakobi Meyers, because why he's not rostered in every league, I have no idea. What this guy, the target share that he's had since the beginning of last year, obviously there was that weird no touchdown stretch that to start his career, but this guy just gets peppered with targets. We're seeing it doesn't matter who the quarterback is, whether it's Bailey Zappi or Mac Jones is in there. He's the number one wide receiver for the Patriots. He's the best wide receiver for the Patriots. I believe he actually just broke the record today for most receptions in his first 3 seasons for a Patriots wide receiver. So the guy's good. The fact that there's 36% of ESPN leagues, 52 of Yahoo, and 39 of sleeper leagues that do not roster him blows my mind.
Crazy.
He should be on every roster in every league.
Next up is another guy that will need to be rostered because of the injury to Rashad Penny. Kenneth Walker did a lot with what he was given. Only got 8 carries, 88 yards, and a touchdown, but that's huge. How do you feel about Kenneth Walker going forward, and what are you doing with him in your lineups?
I mean, we've talked about this a number of times. Rashad Penny is a really good running back when he's healthy. And unfortunately for him, that has not happened very often in his career. And it looks like he may be out for the rest of the season with a shattered ankle. That means Kenneth Walker is getting the work. I do think Travis Homer is going to be involved in the pass game. We had already seen him in there a little bit this year when Kenneth Walker was out. So I think he's going to get some of the work. But Kenneth Walker's the guy they took early in the draft this year that was going to be their long-term running back anyway. He's the guy now. We're talking about an offense that has been pretty good, even though they lost their big quarterback. So Kenneth Walker is going to have opportunities. He's probably going to be a weekly starter and could do big things the remainder of the season. So he is the number one priority this week.
Speaking of big things, we thank you guys as always for watching this week's waiver video. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, hit the notification icon.